The Cabinet at Black Grove House. Chapter 1, The House on Dead Oak Lane. Black Grove House had been vacant for nearly 60 years when Emma Chandler inherited it from an uncle she never knew existed. The house stood at the end of Dead Oak Lane, beyond the town proper of Iverne Hollow, where the fog thickened year-round and the road narrowed into a moss-covered trail. Emma was a literature professor, a lover of quiet places, and in the middle of a bitter divorce. When she received the unexpected letter from a solicitor, informing her she now owned a country estate in rural Wiltshire, she saw it as an opportunity to start over. Somewhere far away. Quiet. But Black Grove wasn't just quiet, it was dead. She arrived in late October, her tires crunching on the gravel driveway buried beneath a carpet of fallen leaves. The house loomed above her like a sleeping beast, its gabled roof split by lightning-bent chimneys, ivy choking its stone walls. "Looks like Dracula's summer home," she muttered, shouldering her overnight bag. The front door creaked open with little resistance, as though the house had been waiting. Chapter 2, The Cabinet. The house smelled of rot and memory. Dust motes danced in the dim shafts of light breaking through the torn curtains. Emma wandered from room to room, making a mental inventory of what needed to be fixed, and what needed to be destroyed. Then, in the study, she found it. The cabinet. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, blackened oak with carvings so deep they seemed burned in. The doors had no handles. A single keyhole marked the center, shaped like an eye. Around the frame, strange symbols curled and spiraled, ancient, almost Celtic, but not quite. It looked like it didn't belong. Not to the house. Not to this world. Emma felt a coldness crawl up her spine. There was no key to be found. She assumed it was locked for a reason and left it alone. That night, in the guest bedroom upstairs, she dreamed of scratching. Something trapped behind wood. Something waiting. Chapter 3, Whispers in the Dust. The next morning, Emma made coffee and opened the study again. The cabinet remained unmoved, but something about the room had changed. There were footprints in the dust. Small. Barefoot. Leading from the fireplace directly to the cabinet's base. And then, nothing. As if the person had disappeared into it. She froze. The fireplace was empty. There was no sign of forced entry. She was alone in the house. She checked every window and door. All locked. She even inspected the attic and basement. Empty. Still, that night, the scratching returned. Louder. More urgent. And this time, it wasn't a dream. Chapter 4, The Locked Door. The scratching had returned the following night. It wasn't just the sound that disturbed Emma, it was the rhythm. A slow, deliberate tapping followed by an unsettling silence, then the desperate scratching again. Each scrape seemed to drag deeper into her skull. Her eyes flickered toward the door, wondering if something would emerge from the study. At 3:12 a.m., she decided she couldn't stand it anymore. Emma grabbed her robe and flashlight, determined to confront whatever was making the noise. The beams of light cut through the thick darkness of the house as she crept down the hallway, stopping just outside the study. The door was slightly ajar. With a deep breath, Emma pushed it open. The room was cold, colder than the rest of the house, and for a moment, she thought she'd imagined it. The cabinet stood silently in the corner, its dark wood unchanged, but the floor was littered with small, twisted objects. Some were broken mirrors. Others, shards of porcelain. A few scattered pins. She felt a strange tugging sensation, like someone was pulling at the very fabric of her mind. It was then that she noticed something new. A faint trace of red streaked across the floor, leading to the base of the cabinet. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She knew, without a doubt, that this had not been here before. The footprints had returned. They were more distinct now, smudges of dark dirt, like the feet of something small yet heavy. There was no denying that something had entered the room, and perhaps left. She couldn't help herself. Emma bent down, her breath shallow, and pressed her palm to the cool wood of the cabinet's door. It was warm. Chapter 5, The Key. The next morning, Emma woke up drenched in sweat. Her dreams were thick with shadows. Eyes. Endless eyes peering from the cracks in the walls. They whispered her name. She couldn't escape the feeling that something in the house was waiting for her. It was as if Black Grove itself had come alive, reaching for her with invisible tendrils. By the time the sun rose, Emma couldn't ignore it any longer. She had to open the cabinet. But she needed the key. The next few hours were spent searching through every room of the house. Every drawer, every cupboard. There was no key to be found. Then, as she was rummaging through a shelf of old books in the study, something caught her eye. A strange, crinkled piece of paper fell from between the pages of a thick leather-bound volume. It was a map, no, not just a map. A blueprint of the house. Emma felt her heart race. The blueprint showed a hidden space under the floorboards in the study, directly beneath the cabinet. A crawl space. It seemed to extend from the cabinet to the far corner of the room. And next to it, scrawled in fading ink, was a note: if you want to understand the darkness, you must first unlock the door. Chapter 6, Beneath the Floor. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. The map, the key, it all felt like a preordained ritual, a trap set for her from the very moment she arrived. But she couldn't leave. Not without knowing the truth. Her hands trembled as she pried up the floorboards in the study, careful not to make too much noise. Beneath them, the crawl space yawned open like a waiting mouth. In the dim light, her flashlight revealed an old iron chest at the far end. Its lock was rusty, and the hinges were covered in dust. But Emma knew it held the key. She approached it slowly, taking shallow breaths. The temperature had dropped several degrees. Her skin prickled as if invisible fingers were brushing against her neck. With a soft click, the chest's lid creaked open. Inside, there was a single object, an old key. It was identical to the keyhole in the cabinet. Emma's pulse quickened. She held the key in her palm, feeling its weight. There was something unsettling about it, its jagged edges, the strange carving on its handle that almost resembled a closed eye. As she stared at it, the whispers returned. They weren't coming from the walls this time. They came from inside her mind. Unlock it, Emma. Unlock the truth. Chapter 7, The Door Opens. The moment Emma inserted the key into the cabinet's lock, a tremor passed through her. The air grew thick, and the room darkened as though the shadows themselves were closing in. With a low, grinding sound, the doors swung open. Nothing happened immediately. For a brief moment, she thought she had imagined the whole thing. But as the doors fully opened, a cold gust of air swept from the cabinet. It smelled of earth, decay, and something worse. The light from her flashlight flickered and went out. There, in the dark, she felt it, a shift in the atmosphere. The scratching, the whispering. All seemed to converge on this single point. She could hear a faint breathing. It was slow, labored. And then, from inside the cabinet, something moved. Chapter 8, The Eyes Within. The breathing inside the cabinet stopped. Emma's heart pounded in her ears as she stood frozen, her hand still gripping the cold key. The room felt tighter, suffocating. Her flashlight flickered again, casting jagged shadows across the walls as the temperature dropped even further. Then, a soft creak echoed from within the cabinet. Something was shifting. Emma's breath hitched. She tried to back away, but her legs felt rooted to the floor. The air around her was thick, humid even, as though the space itself were closing in. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the near darkness, and saw the shape, a figure, half hidden, slowly moving in the far recesses of the cabinet. It was tall, unnaturally so, and its limbs were long, too long. It moved with a fluid, crawling motion, its joints cracking as it stretched. The edges of its body blurred, like a mirage, its silhouette always just out of focus. But most disturbing of all was its face, or what should have been its face. The skin was pale, stretched tight over its bones, and there were no eyes, just empty sockets. From those sockets, though, came dark smoke, swirling like tendrils of black mist, reaching out, grasping the air. Emma felt a chill crawl down her spine, deeper than any cold she had ever known. The figure tilted its head, its hollow gaze landing on her with a focus so intense, it felt as though it were piercing her very soul. It saw her. Suddenly, the room seemed to fall silent. All the noise, the whispering, the breathing, the scratching, ceased in an instant. The only sound left was the rapid thud of Emma's heart, hammering against her ribs. Her hands trembled violently, but her legs still refused to move. The thing in the cabinet was staring at her, but now. Its expression seemed to shift. It smiled. Chapter 9, A Voice in the Dark. The smile was unnatural, grotesque, stretching the creature's lips into a thin, impossibly wide grin. And then, it spoke. The voice wasn't the voice of a human. It was soft, almost a sigh, but deep, like 1,000 whispers compressed into one. You came. For me. Emma's body tensed, and a wave of nausea rolled over her. She struggled to swallow, her throat dry. The creature's words weren't just heard. They throbbed inside her head. They filled her mind with a heavy weight, forcing her to listen, to pay attention. You opened the door. Now you have to see. A cold hand grabbed Emma's wrist. Her flashlight flickered and then went out, leaving her in darkness. Her breath caught in her throat. The thing moved closer. Emma could feel it, though she couldn't see it anymore. She tried to pull her arm away, but its grip tightened, almost tenderly, like a lover's touch, but one that came with intent, with hunger. The air around her crackled, thickening with the presence of something ancient, something hungry. It was pulling her toward the cabinet. The gap between the doors stretched wider, impossibly wide, as if the cabinet were opening, but not in the way that a door should. It was as if the whole room were opening, folding back, revealing something deeper, darker, older than the house itself. A rush of cold air smothered Emma's senses, and she heard the voice again. You were always meant to open it. I waited so long. So long for you to come. The voice changed now, slipping into her thoughts, twisting them. The words were familiar. So familiar. You. You were always mine. Chapter 10, The Past Comes Alive. Her pulse quickened, and panic surged in her chest. She stumbled backward, ripping her wrist from the creature's grip, but the darkness seemed to follow her. The walls of the study moved, bending inward. The room began to warp. Suddenly, Emma was no longer alone. Shapes, indistinct and shadowy, rose from the floor like smoke, filling the room with their cold presence. They crowded her, whispering her name in the same soft, maddening chorus. Emma. Emma. Her eyes burned as she fought to keep them open, and she found herself backing toward the cabinet, a feeling of dread building in her stomach. The cabinet doors loomed larger now, towering above her. The shadows pressed in from all sides. Faces. Faces without features, their eyes dark voids. Children. She gasped and looked down. No, they weren't children. Not really. They were hollow, their forms translucent, but still tethered to the earth by some dark force. They hovered around her, whispering endlessly, and Emma realized they weren't speaking to her. They were speaking to something else, something inside her. You belong to the cabinet, one of the shapes whispered, its voice indistinct but piercing. The key. The words swirled through her mind like a chant. She looked down at the iron key, still clutched in her hand. It was now warm, almost hot, as though it were alive. Her grandfather's warning from the journal flashed in her mind, you will open the cabinet, and the cabinet will open you. It all made sense now. The cabinet was not a vessel. It was a doorway, a portal to something far worse than she could ever have imagined. But worse still. It wasn't just a portal. It was alive. And it wanted her. Chapter 11, The Choice. She could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. The faces of the spirits shifted closer, their hollow eyes boring into hers. Emma's hands were shaking, but she had to act. With a shaky breath, she dropped the key into the open crack of the cabinet. For a brief moment, nothing happened. The world around her seemed to freeze in time. And then, the key turned. Awesome. Here's part 4 of The Cabinet at Black Grove House, where the dark secrets of the house start to emerge, and Emma is forced to confront the true horror of what's been lurking in the cabinet. Chapter 12, The Heart of the House. The moment the key turned, the cabinet doors exploded open with a deafening crack, sending a shockwave of cold air throughout the room. The walls of Black Grove House trembled, as though the very bones of the building were groaning in protest. Emma stumbled back, falling to the floor, her eyes wide with terror as the air around her grew dense. The cabinet's opening grew wider still, stretching, as though the space inside was pulling the room itself into it. The ground beneath her feet seemed to warp, tilting and distorting in unnatural angles. From within the cabinet, a shadow stirred. Not just a shadow, a presence. A blackened shape that seemed to shift and writhe like a living mass. Emma's vision blurred as she tried to focus, but the figure was too powerful, too overwhelming. It was as though the darkness inside was bleeding outward, saturating the room, pulling everything toward it. The whispering voices intensified, rising in a cacophony of terror, screeching and begging for release. Emma covered her ears, but it did nothing. The voices were inside her skull now, pounding at her consciousness, demanding her attention. It's coming. It's always been here. It wants you, Emma. The sound of something scraping the floor echoed through the room, growing louder, closer. The figure inside the cabinet moved. And then, it emerged. It wasn't fully human, but it wasn't entirely a creature either. It had limbs that bent in impossible angles, long and gangly, covered in skin that was not quite flesh. It crawled out of the cabinet like a spider emerging from its web, its black, featureless eyes locked onto her. Emma's blood ran cold. Her legs were frozen, unwilling to move. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, every thump loud enough to shatter her thoughts. The creature moved toward her, its limbs clicking like bones, the sound sharp and unnatural. It came closer, and closer still, until Emma could feel its breath on her face, if you could even call it breath. It was a foul, putrid air, carrying the scent of rot and decay. The cabinet's voice rang out again in her mind. You're mine now, Emma. She didn't understand it. Why had it chosen her? Why had it waited for her? Chapter 13, The History of Black Grove. The creature loomed over her, its shadow consuming the room. For a moment, Emma's mind wandered back to the one thing she had refused to acknowledge, the history of Black Grove House. She had found the journal, after all. Her grandfather's cryptic warnings, the bizarre carvings on the cabinet, it was all connected. But how? Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She forced herself to think, to focus. She had to get out of there, but there was nowhere to run. The house itself had become a prison. The air was thick with tension, and she remembered the map she had found in the library. The blueprint of the house, with the hidden space beneath the floorboards, the secret passages, and one particular detail stood out, the heart of the house. She had ignored it at first, assuming it was some sort of ancient reference. But now, it made sense. The house had been built around something. Something alive. Her grandfather had written in his journal, "The house is alive. It feeds on blood. It is a thing of hunger." Her breath quickened. She hadn't fully understood what he meant then, but now, it was as though the walls of Black Grove were pressing in on her. The house had been built around the cabinet, around the creature inside. Everything, every part of the house, had been designed to feed it. It wasn't just a house. It was a trap. The cabinet had always been the centerpiece, the heart, and Emma had unknowingly walked into its grasp. Chapter 14, The Pact. The creature drew closer, its limbs moving with inhuman speed. Emma barely had time to react before it was standing directly in front of her, its hollow, lidless eyes locked on hers. For a moment, everything stood still. The whispers faded into a suffocating silence. And then, it spoke, not out loud, but in her head, in her very mind. "Do you know what you are, Emma?" Her mouth went dry. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "You are the last of your bloodline. The final offering." Emma's breath caught. Last? She tried to push herself back, but her body didn't obey her. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. The pressure around her chest grew unbearable, and she felt herself sinking, her limbs turning heavy and unresponsive. "I've been waiting so long for you, Emma. So long for you to come. The cabinet was only the beginning. Now, we can finish it." In that moment, it hit her. The house. The cabinet. Her grandfather's strange obsession. The journal. Everything. He had known. He had always known. The creature had been waiting for her, for generations. It was part of her lineage, part of something older than the house itself. It had been feeding on her ancestors, drawing them in one by one, until they were absorbed into the very walls of Blackgrove House. Each family member had been a sacrifice. And now, it was her turn. Chapter 15, The Offering. Emma's mind raced. The fear, the terror, it paralyzed her. But deep within her, a spark of defiance ignited. She wasn't just going to give in. She remembered her grandfather's final words, his last desperate plea in his journal: "I tried to stop it. I sealed the cabinet, but it's too strong. It needs the blood of the bloodline. You are its last hope." There was only one way to break the cycle. She had to destroy the cabinet. But first, she had to make the creature believe she was willing to become part of it. Emma's eyes flickered toward the cabinet. The key. The one thing that might be able to destroy it. With every ounce of her strength, Emma pushed herself to her feet. The cabinet was no longer a door. Chapter 16, The Last Stand. Emma's mind raced, each thought a fractured memory. The journal. The key. Her grandfather's warnings. Everything was coming to a head. She was standing in the very center of Blackgrove House, the heartbeat of a nightmare, surrounded by the cabinet, the creature, and her own helplessness. But there was something deep inside her that screamed to fight back. Fight or die. She wasn't ready to succumb to this thing's hunger. Not yet. Not while there was even the faintest chance of survival. Her gaze locked onto the cabinet again. The key, still clenched in her hand, felt warm, alive. "I can destroy it," she whispered to herself. "I can end this." But how? She glanced at the creature, still hovering before her. Its long limbs shifted, its head tilted slightly, like it was assessing her, probing her thoughts. Emma could feel its presence invade her mind, cold and suffocating, its intentions clear. It wanted her inside the cabinet, as the others had been before her. It wanted to consume her, to make her one with the darkness. "You think you can fight me?" The creature's voice rang out in her head, thick with mockery. "You cannot. I have waited for this moment far too long. You are the end of your bloodline, Emma. You belong to me." The words burned through her consciousness, but Emma gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus. There had to be something she could do. She wasn't just a victim, she was a part of this twisted game, but she also had the power to break it. The key. Her grandfather had written that the key could unlock the cabinet. But the true purpose of the key was far darker. It could both open and close the portal, the doorway between worlds. It could seal the creature away forever. Or, it could set it free. She felt the weight of her bloodline's curse upon her shoulders. For generations, the family had been tied to this place, tied to the thing inside the cabinet. The creature was part of her history, but it didn't have to be part of her future. Chapter 17, The Crucible of the Mind. As Emma held the key tighter, a vision overtook her, a violent rush of images, flashes of the house's twisted past, of other family members who had come before her. The house wasn't always Blackgrove. It had once been a sanctuary, a place of peace, built on sacred ground. But her ancestors had made a terrible pact with something ancient, something beyond the natural world. The cabinet had once been an altar, an offering ground for the entity that now waited to claim her. Each generation had contributed to the cycle. Sacrifice. Blood. Souls. Her grandfather had tried to break the curse, but it was too late. The cabinet had consumed him, and now, it was waiting for her. Emma stumbled, nearly dropping the key. Her hand reached for her chest, as though the weight of the history was too much to bear. "You are not alone, Emma," the creature hissed. "You belong to me. Your blood, your soul, are mine. This house is mine. This house was made for me." The house shuddered, the walls groaning in agony as though reacting to the creature's words. The cold in the room deepened, and the shadows in the corners of the study twisted like living things. The floor beneath her feet pulsed, as if it were alive, thumping to the rhythm of an unseen heartbeat. Her breath quickened. She couldn't let this happen. The vision started again, faster now. Flashes of the cabinet's creation, the whispered rituals, the souls of those who had disappeared over the centuries, all leading to one chilling realization: she was the last. The final offering. The cabinet needed her blood, her soul, to complete the ritual. But there was something Emma could do to stop it. She just had to understand the truth. The creature had told her she was the last. The bloodline could end with her, but only if she chose. Chapter 18, The Heart of Blackgrove. Her mind was no longer her own. It was filled with images of the house, its bones and its beating heart. The cabinet. The darkness. The hunger. Emma could feel her breath catch in her throat as she stepped closer to the cabinet, her body moving without thinking. The creature didn't react, watching her closely with its hollow gaze, almost as if it were savoring the moment. Everything about the house was feeding the creature, the structure, the very land it sat on, the history of her family. It thrived on the bloodline. The cabinet had been the catalyst, a physical manifestation of the entity's will. But it was nothing without the blood it demanded. Her blood. "Close the door, Emma," she heard her grandfather's voice whisper in her mind, distant but unmistakable. "The bloodline ends with you. You must close the door. Destroy the cabinet before it consumes you." But how? The answer came like a slap to her senses. The key. The key didn't just open the cabinet, it could also close it. The cabinet had always been a doorway, a passage from this world to another, and the key was the only thing that could sever the connection. Chapter 19, The Key to Freedom. Her hand was shaking as she reached for the cabinet. With every step, the room grew colder, the air thicker. The creature's form blurred again, as though it were warping between dimensions. Its dark eyes never left her, and Emma could feel its presence growing stronger, its hunger intensifying. With one last deep breath, Emma raised the key above her head. She focused on the cabinet, on the door that had become her only chance of escape. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the whispers of the house. "I will not be your offering. This ends now." She plunged the key into the lock of the cabinet with all the strength she could muster. And the world shattered. Chapter 20, The Shattering. The key turned with a sickening snap, and for a brief moment, everything stopped. The shadows in the room, the dark, oppressive weight that had clung to her since she entered Blackgrove House, seemed to hold their breath. The whispers, the voices in her mind, they all fell silent. The air in the room grew still, thick with anticipation, as though the house itself were waiting for something. Emma's fingers tightened around the key. She didn't let go. She couldn't. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she stared at the cabinet, waiting for the inevitable. And then, the door slammed shut. It wasn't a quiet, gradual closing. No. It was as if the entire space had collapsed. A shockwave of force burst from the cabinet, reverberating through the room. The walls trembled, the floor beneath Emma's feet cracked open with a loud creak, and for a split second, she felt as if the entire house was going to fall in on itself. The creature screamed. A high-pitched, distorted wail filled the room, like nails dragged across a chalkboard, but worse, the sound of something dying, something being torn apart. Emma staggered back, the force of the scream nearly knocking her off her feet. She covered her ears, but the sound was inside her skull, vibrating her very bones. It felt as if the scream was coming from the very heart of Blackgrove itself. The cabinet had closed. But it wasn't over. Chapter 21, The Price. Emma's body was shaking violently. She struggled to maintain her balance as the darkness pressed in on her, suffocating and thick, like the very air had turned into a living thing. The whispers were gone, but the silence was worse. It was oppressive, cold. The creature's presence lingered, its shadow still stretching across the walls despite the cabinet being closed. And in the silence, Emma could feel something shifting in the air. The temperature was plummeting, her breath coming out in shaky clouds. "You can't run," the creature's voice rumbled, distant, but undeniably close. It was inside her mind now, sliding through her thoughts like oil on water. "This is not over, Emma." A surge of cold flooded her chest, and a pain so sharp it felt like her heart was being crushed exploded in her ribs. She gasped, collapsing to her knees. It was as if the house was alive, its pulse racing in rhythm with her own. The darkness had never truly been contained. "You opened it." The voice echoed in her head, reverberating, distorting. "You cannot close what was meant to be open." Emma's vision blurred as another wave of pain tore through her. She gasped for air, but it was as if the walls themselves were pressing against her chest, making it harder to breathe. No. No. She had to fight this. In the distance, beyond the cabinet, something began to shift. The house itself was changing. The floorboards cracked, splintering beneath her feet, and the walls around her seemed to ripple, as if the house had become fluid. The shadows lengthened and twisted, and Emma realized with a sickening horror that the cabinet had not just been a gateway. It had been the anchor. As the cabinet doors closed, it had triggered something that couldn't be contained by a simple turning of the key. The house had awoken. Chapter 22, The Unseen Prison. Emma scrambled to her feet, trying to steady herself against the oppressive atmosphere. But her head was spinning, and every breath felt like a struggle. The house was alive, pulsating with a malignant energy. The air was so thick it felt like swimming through water, heavy and suffocating. The walls were shifting, the shadows crawling across the floor, as if the very essence of the house had become a living, breathing entity. It was no longer a house. It was a prison, and Emma was its unwilling guest. Suddenly, the key in her hand began to glow. It was faint at first, but the glow intensified, spreading across the key like veins of light running through the metal. The light burned her fingers, hot to the touch. Emma yelped and almost dropped it, but she couldn't. It was the only thing that seemed to matter now, the one connection she had left to reality. The creature's voice returned, dark and distant, but more powerful now, more insistent. "You cannot escape me. You are already part of me. This is your house. It always has been." Emma's breath quickened, her pulse pounding in her ears. Part of me. She realized then that the creature had always been inside her. It wasn't just in the cabinet. It wasn't just tied to Blackgrove House. It had been within her bloodline, waiting for the right moment to awaken. She was the last of her family, the last piece of the puzzle. The cabinet had been its anchor, but it had also been a lock, and now that the cabinet was closed, the creature was no longer bound by it. It was free to move throughout the house, throughout Emma's mind. She felt it then, its dark tendrils reaching deep into her consciousness, searching for her thoughts, her memories. It wanted control. It wanted to consume her, to turn her into one of its hollow, soul-drained vessels. Her family had been its servants. They had built this house as a prison to keep it contained. But now it had finally broken free, and Emma was all that stood between it and the world. Chapter 23, The Choice. Emma's mind raced. The light from the key grew brighter, its energy growing stronger. She didn't know what would happen if she tried to use it again. Could she even survive the consequence? She had a choice to make. She could give herself to the creature, let it consume her entirely, and let Black Grove House have its soul, or she could try to close it forever, knowing the risk. The key pulsed in her hand. Her pulse matched the rhythm of the light, a beating that echoed in the very bones of the house. In that moment, Emma understood. The house was a tomb, and the creature was its warden. The key wasn't just a tool. It was a weapon forged to keep the house's secret hidden. But there was something more. She was the key. Chapter 24, The True Nature. The house seemed to breathe with her. The walls whispered in time with her heartbeat, every pulse resonating through the very bones of the building. The air was thick, suffocating, filled with the presence of something ancient, something hungry. The key, still glowing faintly in her hand, pulsed with a rhythm that matched the house's heartbeat. Emma's breath came in shallow gasps, her body trembling under the weight of the creature's presence. She felt it inside her mind, pressing against her thoughts, trying to twist her will, to make her submit. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. With every passing second, she could feel the creature's power growing stronger. Its shadow stretched further into the room, becoming more solid, more corporeal. Its limbs twitched, its form flickering in and out of focus, as if it were being pulled between realities. "You can't run, Emma. You belong to me." The voice filled her head, a low, guttural growl that reverberated through her skull. It was coming from everywhere, from the house itself, from the creature that had once been locked away in the cabinet. The hunger, the longing, was so deep it rattled her bones. She was no longer just fighting for her life. She was fighting for her soul. The house was a prison, but it was also a gateway, a portal to something beyond, something that no human mind could comprehend. The creature was not just bound to the house. It was tied to the bloodline. Her bloodline. Her grandfather had known. He had tried to break the curse, to sever the connection, but in the end, the creature had always returned. And now it was Emma's turn. Chapter 25, The Descent. Her hand tightened around the key, and in that moment, she felt it, the deep, pulsing connection between her and the house. The key was not just an object. It was an extension of her, a symbol of everything that had come before her and everything that would come after. She was tied to the house, tied to the creature. But she also had the power to break the cycle. The key was more than just a tool, it was a choice. The creature hissed, sensing her realization. It moved closer, its long limbs scraping across the floor like nails on a blackboard. The air grew colder with each step it took, the shadows stretching longer, wrapping around her like a noose. "You can't escape, Emma. You are mine. Your blood is mine." Emma staggered back, the weight of the creature's words crashing into her like a wave. It was true. She was the last of her bloodline. The creature had been waiting for her, for this moment. It had consumed every ancestor before her, devoured them, body and soul, and now it wanted her. But she could feel it, deep in her chest, in the very marrow of her bones. She was different. She wasn't the same as the others who had come before her. She wasn't just another victim. She was the end. Her mind flashed back to the journal, to the cryptic words her grandfather had written before his descent into madness: "The key is both the lock and the doorway. The bloodline must end, or it will consume everything." The truth was clearer now. The creature needed her to complete the cycle, to seal her fate, to become part of it. It would absorb her, just as it had absorbed all the others. And once she was gone, the cycle would begin again, new blood for the house, for the creature. But she couldn't let that happen. Chapter 26, Breaking the Chain. The creature was almost upon her now, its blackened eyes gleaming with malice. Emma could feel its power, its darkness swirling around her like a storm. It whispered her name, over and over again, calling to her, pulling at her mind. Emma, come to me. It's your destiny. You have no choice. But Emma knew better now. She had the choice. She always had. The key, still glowing faintly in her hand, seemed to respond to her thoughts, to her desperation. It was more than just a weapon, it was a reflection of her will. The key was alive. It was tied to her, just as she was tied to Blackgrove House. She raised the key, her hand shaking, but her resolve hardening. The creature recoiled for a moment, its form flickering with confusion. It didn't understand. It had never been challenged. The house itself seemed to groan, the walls contracting, as if it, too, was struggling against her. The shadows pressed in on her, but Emma held the key high, focusing all her strength, all her will into that single, defining moment. This ends now, she thought, and she thrust the key toward the heart of the house. The moment the key touched the air around her, the entire room exploded in light, a blinding, searing light that engulfed everything. The creature screeched, its form twisting in agony as the key burned with an intensity that Emma had never felt before. The light surged, breaking through the darkness, flooding every corner of Blackgrove House. The walls shook, and the ground beneath her feet cracked open, the very foundations of the house trembling as though the building were being ripped apart. The creature screamed again, but this time, there was no mistaking the sound. It was the scream of something that was dying. Chapter 27, The Heart of Darkness. The light continued to burn, flooding the house with a pure, white radiance. Emma could feel the house's grip loosening, its hold on her mind slipping away. She wasn't sure how long it lasted, minutes. Hours? It didn't matter. When the light finally faded, when the blinding brilliance receded, Emma found herself standing in the center of a different Blackgrove house. The air was lighter now, no longer thick with oppressive darkness. The weight that had crushed her chest, the whispers in her mind, were gone. There was only silence. Complete, utter silence. And in that silence, Emma realized something. The house was empty. The walls, once dark and alive with malevolent energy, were now just walls, dusty, old, and forgotten. The creature was gone. It had been consumed by the very energy it had tried to use to bind her, and now, there was nothing left. For the first time, Emma felt truly free. But as she looked around the decaying house, a small part of her wondered, had she truly destroyed it? Or had she merely delayed the inevitable? The key in her hand pulsed one last time, its glow fading into nothingness. The house was quiet. But it had always been quiet, hadn't it? Chapter 28, The Quiet After the Storm. The silence was deafening. Emma stood alone in the center of the room, the dust motes dancing in the still air around her. The oppressive weight that had clung to the house like a living, breathing thing was gone. The air no longer felt heavy with the creature's presence, no longer thick with malevolent whispers. It felt, almost normal. The house was still. The creaking floorboards, the shadows that once stretched like dark hands ready to claim her, everything had stilled. The walls, which had seemed alive with some unholy energy, were now just old, decaying surfaces, cracked with age. The windows, once covered with dirt and grime, now let in the light of the fading afternoon. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Emma could breathe without the suffocating fear that had haunted her every waking moment. But was it truly over? Her eyes darted around the room, her body still shaking with adrenaline, as if expecting the creature to materialize out of the shadows. The key in her hand, the key that had so violently shattered the creature's grasp, felt heavy, almost as if it were alive, pulsing faintly with a power that she couldn't quite understand. She had destroyed the creature's anchor, but had she truly destroyed it? Or had she only delayed what was coming? The house, despite its silence, felt unfinished. Chapter 29, The Unanswered Questions. Emma took a cautious step forward, her bare feet brushing against the cold, cracked wooden floor. The house was dead, but there was a lingering sense of something else, something unsettling. The quiet felt wrong, like a calm before a storm. She ran her fingers along the edge of the cabinet. It was just a cabinet now, plain and ordinary, but she could still feel the remnants of its terrible presence. The lock was gone. The door, which had once held such power, was now nothing more than rotting wood. But Emma's gut twisted in unease. What had happened to the creature? Was it truly gone? Her grandfather's journal flashed through her mind. The words he had written about the curse, about the key, about the house being a prison, it was all coming back to her now. He had tried to destroy the creature before, but his attempts had failed. Why had hers succeeded where his had not? What had she done differently? Emma gripped the key tightly, her knuckles white. She had fought with all the strength she had, but in the back of her mind, a question gnawed at her: had she truly won? The house had been silent for now. But the silence was no promise of safety. No promise of peace. She turned sharply, glancing back at the shadowy corners of the room, feeling a tremor run through her. Something was still there. It had to be. Chapter 30, The Echoes of the Past. As Emma walked further into the house, she was drawn, almost unwillingly, to the stairs that led down to the basement. She hadn't dared venture there before. The basement had always been a forbidden place in her family's history. Her grandfather had told her never to go near it, but there had been no real explanation, just an overwhelming sense of danger. But now, with the house in ruins, and the creature seemingly defeated, the pull to descend felt inescapable. Her heart hammered in her chest as she made her way down the narrow, decaying staircase. The air grew colder as she descended, and the shadows pressed in tighter, suffocating. It was as though the house had been holding its breath, waiting for her to arrive at this very moment. At the bottom of the stairs, she found herself in a small, low-ceilinged room. It was dark, oppressively dark, but Emma felt her way along the walls until her fingers brushed against something cold and metal. A door. Her breath hitched. It wasn't just any door, it was a new door. She hadn't seen this before. It didn't belong in the house. But it was there, its heavy iron lock rusted with age, its surface marked with deep scratches as if something had tried to claw its way out from the other side. It was the door to the heart of the house. The feeling of dread surged within her, but she couldn't stop herself. With trembling hands, she reached for the lock. The key was still warm in her hand, the metal seeming to hum with some forgotten energy. She pressed it into the lock. Chapter 31, The Rebirth. The key turned with a grinding sound, the metal scraping painfully against the rusted lock. A flood of memories rushed back, her grandfather's cryptic warnings, the creature's voice in her mind, the terror that had plagued her every moment in Blackgrove House. As the door creaked open, Emma found herself face to face with the impossible. The room beyond was vast. It was unlike any part of the house she had seen before. The walls were lined with shelves, ancient tomes, strange artifacts. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and upon that pedestal, a jar, black, thick with some oily substance that shimmered in the dim light. And within it, something stirred. Emma's breath caught in her throat. There was a face, distorted and twisted, a face that seemed to stare right through her, its eyes wide with terror. The creature was still alive, still trapped inside that jar, its form only half visible, but unmistakable. It was alive, and it was waiting. The room seemed to pulse with an energy so dark it almost burned her skin. The house, the cabinet, the creature, all of it was intertwined. The key hadn't broken the curse, it had simply sealed it, and in doing so, had awakened something even worse. Emma staggered back, the realization crashing down upon her like a wave. She had freed the house, but she had also unleashed something far darker. The creature had never truly been locked away. It had only been contained, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what it had lost. The jar, that grotesque vessel, was a prison, and it was now cracked. Chapter 32, The Final Choice. Her mind raced. The key. The creature. The house. It all led back to this one, horrifying truth: the creature could never be destroyed. It had been part of the land long before Black Grove House had been built, and it would remain there, waiting for the right moment to break free once again. The house had been its prison, but it had also been its vessel, its anchor. And now, as Emma stood in front of the jar, she realized that the only way to ensure the creature never returned was to destroy it utterly. But to destroy it, she would have to sacrifice everything. She glanced at the jar, at the creature's face, its empty eyes that seemed to plead with her. But she knew the truth now: there was no peace, no safety, no future for her or anyone else while it remained. Emma made her choice. Chapter 33, The Heart of the Creature. Emma's eyes never left the jar. The creature's form within it was twitching, its grotesque, twisted shape barely visible through the thick, oily substance that surrounded it. Its face, stared back at her, its expression one of agonizing suffering, as though it had been waiting for this moment for centuries. The realization crashed down on her like a tidal wave. The house, the creature, the cabinet, it had all been part of an eternal cycle. A curse bound to the land, to her family, to her. Her hands trembled as she gripped the key. The decision before her was so simple, yet so horrifying. To destroy the creature would mean obliterating not just the last remnant of Black Grove House's dark history, but the heart of the house itself. To destroy it, she would have to use the key once more. And in doing so, she would release a force that might consume her entirely. She didn't know if she would survive. But she also knew that if she didn't act now, everything she had fought for would be for nothing. Her fingers tightened around the key. The light it emitted was soft, almost like a heartbeat, but it felt stronger now, more alive. It called to her. She felt it resonating within her, as though the key itself had been forged from the same bloodline, the same evil. She was the last, and now she had to make the ultimate choice. Destroy it. Or become part of it. Chapter 34, The Ritual. She stepped forward slowly, each movement like wading through thick tar. The cold air wrapped around her, suffocating, but she ignored it. There was only the key, the jar, and the creature staring at her with eyes full of ancient hunger. As her fingers hovered over the jar's surface, the creature's form began to shift. It writhed in its prison, the oily substance around it churning like something alive. Its voice, slithered through her mind like a whisper in the dark. You cannot destroy what is eternal, Emma. I am part of you. I will always be part of you. The words filled her head, trying to break her, to make her hesitate. But Emma didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The creature was wrong. It wasn't eternal. She was eternal. For the first time, she understood the house's true nature. It was a vessel, a container meant to hold something ancient. And for centuries, that something had been waiting for someone to open the door. Someone to release it. But now, Emma was the one who would close it forever. She pressed the key into the air in front of the jar. The air itself seemed to suck around her, pulling at her, as if the house was trying to drag her into its depths. She felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her, the house's eyes, the eyes of her ancestors who had built it, who had tried to contain the creature. They were all watching, waiting. But Emma didn't falter. She closed her eyes, steadying herself, and pushed the key down into the jar. The air exploded with a force so violent that it knocked her off her feet. The light from the key flared blindingly bright, filling the room with a radiance so intense that the walls seemed to shudder. The jar cracked, splintered, and the creature inside began to scream. The shriek was so deafening that Emma's ears rang with the force of it. The house trembled. The shadows in the room writhed, twisting violently, as if the very foundation of Black Grove House was collapsing. The walls cracked, and dust poured from the ceiling. The house was fighting, struggling against the pull of the key, but Emma held her ground. She had to finish this. Chapter 35, The Final Confrontation. The light from the key pulsed with a strength she had never felt before. The creature's screams grew louder, more desperate, but it was losing. The very core of its existence was being torn apart, unraveled by the power of the key and the will of the last of the Blackgrove bloodline. And then, in the heartbeat before the world exploded, there was silence. Emma's head swam. Her vision blurred. The house around her seemed to collapse into itself, the walls distorting, the floor buckling beneath her feet. The air tasted bitter, like something was rotting, something ancient and powerful that was finally being broken down. She gasped for air, her lungs burning as if she hadn't breathed in hours. When the light faded, she opened her eyes. The house was still. The creature was gone. But in its place, there was something else. At the center of the room where the jar had been, a blackened mark had appeared on the floor, a symbol that seemed to writhe and pulse with a life of its own. The shadows still clung to the corners of the room, but there was something different about them now. The key had worked, but it had come at a price. Chapter 36, The Last Choice. Emma staggered back, her hand still clutching the key. Her body felt drained, empty, like the energy had been pulled out of her. She wanted to collapse, but she knew she couldn't. There was still work to be done. The mark on the floor was spreading, crawling like ink across the wood. It was alive, and it was growing. Her mind raced. The creature might be gone, but the house, the curse, was still there. It was as though Blackgrove House had been reborn, and Emma could feel the weight of it in the air. The power of the house still lingered, twisted and corrupted. She had destroyed the creature, yes, but in doing so, she had released something else. Something far worse. She could feel it now, the presence of another force, one that had been locked away even longer than the creature. Something more ancient. It was as if the house itself had fed on the creature's energy and had grown stronger. Emma clenched her fists. She couldn't let this happen. She had to stop it now, before it was too late. The key was her last hope, but she knew, deep in her soul, that it could only work if she gave herself to it, if she allowed the house to consume her the way it had consumed her family. She would become part of the house, part of its curse, just like her ancestors before her. She would keep it contained. Forever. Chapter 37, The Weight of Sacrifice. Emma stood frozen in the center of the room, her eyes locked onto the spreading mark that had appeared on the floor, the one that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. The shadows at the corners of the room had grown deeper, their edges sharpening, curling like tendrils reaching toward her. Her breath came in shallow gasps as the weight of her decision bore down on her. The house was alive, not with the creature she had fought so desperately to destroy, but with something far older. Far more powerful. For a moment, she felt the house calling to her, like a voice from the depths of her bloodline, a voice that spoke of sacrifice and duty. It was the house's nature, to devour, to consume, to feed on the souls of those who had the misfortune to live in its shadow. Her hands shook, the key still tightly clutched in her palm. She could feel its power resonating within her, urging her to take the final step, to complete what had been started centuries ago. To become part of the house. To bind herself to it. And in that moment, Emma realized something. The house had always chosen its next victim. Her grandfather had been consumed by it. Her ancestors had been claimed by its darkness. It was a cycle, an eternal loop of possession, death, and rebirth. But Emma wasn't going to let it continue. She wouldn't be another victim. She wouldn't become part of the house. Chapter 38, Breaking the Cycle. The mark on the floor twisted like a living thing, its lines stretching and contorting into symbols that made no sense, yet filled Emma with an overwhelming sense of dread. The shadows pressed in around her, whispering her name, calling her to give in, to surrender. You cannot escape, Emma. You belong to me. Your blood, your soul, they are mine. The voice, no, the presence, was everywhere, filling her mind, drowning out her thoughts. It was as if the house itself had become a living, breathing thing, and it wanted her. But Emma refused. She had to refuse. The house wasn't just a building. It was a prison. A trap. And the creature, the thing that had been locked away, was only one part of it. The real darkness was in the heart of Black Grove House. The house itself was the curse. With the key in her hand, Emma took a step toward the mark. The shadows recoiled, as if they feared her presence. The key in her palm thrummed, its light flickering with an energy she could barely comprehend. She had the power to end this. To finish what had started so long ago. She could feel the pull of the house, its gravity trying to suck her in, but she fought against it. She had no choice. She had to break the cycle. She had to destroy the house's grip on her bloodline, on the land, on everything. And she would do it herself. Emma raised the key high above her head. The air around her shuddered, crackling with tension. She could feel the very soul of the house, the ancient, malevolent force, clinging to her as if trying to hold her back. No. The voice screamed, its tone twisted and desperate. It was the creature, or maybe it was the house itself, but it didn't matter anymore. Emma knew what she had to do. The key in her hand was the key to freedom, but it would require a price. A price she was willing to pay. Chapter 39, The Final Act. In one swift motion, Emma slammed the key into the mark on the floor. The air around her exploded with light, a blinding, searing brilliance that engulfed the room and filled every corner of Black Grove House. The house screamed in agony, its walls cracking and groaning as if it were alive and being torn apart from the inside. The darkness that had ruled the house for centuries began to shatter. The shadows that had once clung to the corners of every room dissolved into nothingness. The mark on the floor pulsed one final time, and then it disappeared, vanishing completely, leaving only the cold, empty space. But the light didn't fade. The light burned, and Emma felt herself being pulled into it, the power of the house, the curse, and the creature swirling around her, tugging at her very soul. Her body shook with the force of it, but Emma held firm. She had made her choice. She was ending the cycle. The key had been forged for this very purpose, to destroy the house, to free herself from its curse. She could feel the house's life force being drained away, its hold on the land weakening, cracking. The very foundations of Black Grove House trembled as if it were being ripped apart at the seams. The light grew brighter, and Emma's vision blurred. But in the midst of the storm, she felt a sense of peace. The key that had guided her, was no longer just a tool. It was part of her. She had used it not to imprison, but to free. Chapter 40, The End of Black Grove. When the light finally receded, when the storm of energy had passed, Emma was left standing in the center of a room that was no longer alive. The air was still, the weight of darkness lifted. Black Grove House had been destroyed. She was standing in a house that no longer existed. The walls were gone. The floors had crumbled into dust. The haunting presence that had lingered in every corner was now silent. The mark on the floor, the one that had once threatened to consume her, was now nothing more than a faint trace in the dust. Emma looked around, breathing heavily. The key had dissolved in her hand, leaving only the faintest trace of warmth where it had been. It was over. The house was gone. The creature was gone. And her bloodline was no longer bound to the curse. She had broken the cycle. But in the stillness, Emma felt something shift, something that made her heart race. The land. The very earth beneath her feet was different. There was a sense of finality, a sense that something had been finished. For the first time in her life, Emma was free. The house, the bloodline, the curse, it was all gone. Chapter 41, A New Dawn. The sun was rising, casting its first golden light over the land that had once been Black Grove House. The skies were clear, the air fresh, and for the first time, Emma felt the weight of generations lift from her shoulders. She was no longer a prisoner of the house. She was no longer bound by its dark past. And as she stood in the ruins of what had been, she realized, she was free to live. Truly free. The land would heal. The darkness that had plagued Black Grove House for so long would fade into history, and the echoes of its horror would be silenced. Emma turned away from the ruins and began to walk toward the horizon. The future was hers now.